Welcome, everybody. I'm back with another game. This time we're going to look at the Stonewall. We got a request in the comments recently to look at the version of the Stonewall that we play in the Chess Goals course. It's a really interesting way of playing it because we play a different move order and something that almost white players are probably likely to have never seen before. So we're going to go through the opening pretty quickly here because we got through it through kind of a strange move order. And there are definitely some move order subtleties here that I'll get into in another video. But this knight h6 is really the key sort of defining way of how we play the Stonewall. And here my opponent just played d4, which transposes into the meat of the position that we're interested in. Before we dive in, I just wanted to quickly comment that if you check the description, I have a link to this game with a full analysis all written out. There's a bunch more lines than I'm going to be able to cover here. So make sure to check that out, guys. So stick around. There's some really cool stuff coming up here. So after castles and sort of bishop e2, and we play knight d7 and queen c2, we get kind of the first sort of key idea, which is the point of this knight h6, is that we're often going to come back to f7, which is a dual purpose idea. When I first started playing the Stonewall with this knight h6, I never wanted to drop this knight back because it felt like an awkward backwards move, and I always wanted to reserve and try to go to g4. But that's really just not the idea. One of the main ideas is dropping back to f7 is we're defending this e5 square, which is going to prevent a knight from dropping in. And we're also supporting g5, which is one of our key sort of attacking ideas and something that we often get much sooner in these lines than you do in the typical lines where you play knight to f6, because the queen is defending the square and this pawn is defending it. So we don't have to do that maneuver where they play king h8, rook g8, and then play it. We get it in a much faster way. So here my opponent plays c takes d, and because he hasn't castled yet, this is actually a pretty terrible move and something I learned in my analysis of this because I didn't actually go for it, is go for the right way of playing it. The best way, and what we always want to do, is we want to take here. And that doesn't seem possible because it just seems like it just hangs a pawn. But actually, that's not true at all. And yes, okay, it hangs a pawn, but we get a massive initiative if they take it. So for example, after queen takes, we have this kind of stunning knight to e5, and we're hitting the queen, and the queen has got to drop back. For example, if you go to queen h5, trying to stick around and be active, you just lose the queen because bishop g4 happens, and there's literally no square anywhere that queen can go to, so that's just a drop queen. So the queen's got to drop back to c2, and now we get to continue with our shenanigans here. We play knight takes f3, and when the bishop takes, we bring this queen out to h4. Now, it doesn't help any at all. In fact, it's actually much worse if they take with a pawn. Check the notes in the PGN if you want to look at those lines. So bishop takes, we play queen to h4. And our point is that this square is really weak. And when they took the pawn on f5, they've opened up our rook, and we already have these connecting points here. And Black has a lot of trouble castling right now. They just can't castle queenside. That's just mate in one. So it's clear they can't castle the way they're used to castling. And the best that they can do is actually to play g3. And we just go to queen h3. And our plan in this line is almost always the same. We're going to play knight to g5. We're going to attack this bishop. We're opening up the rook to attack here. And we have this nice tempo move with bishop f5 hitting the queen. So for example, trying to drop the bishop back to preemptively avoid getting hit here and maybe trying to kick our queen out, we just go knight g5 anyway. And if you try to play f4, that doesn't help you in the least. We can just play bishop to f5. You try to block with the bishop, no big deal. We have a check now. Now you're never going to castle. And after king f2, we just have knight takes d4 and e takes, and now bishop takes d3. And after this, we can just grab this pawn. And yes, we've sacked a piece, and we technically have nothing for it, but this king is not going to survive. I mean, if you look at the computer eval, we're already like in a +10 position, and there's not really anything that white can do that's any better. So for example, let's say they didn't play h3 and instead just tried to castle queenside. Well, this is even worse, because after knight g5, we're threatening to win back the pawn immediately. We get queen to e2, trying to defend it. Again, if g3, we're just going to play here, and the bishop can't drop back now because this pawn would hang. So we can just take it, and after pawn takes, we have queen h5. And at the very absolute least, we're going to grab our material back. So So for example, f4 is actually the best move. We're just going to play bishop here, and we're picking up an exchange already, and we're just up clean material. If, for example, you try to do something different, like say you try to play here, well, no big deal. We can play queen takes f3. We can play rook takes f3 if you want it. And we've got the bishop pair. We've got a weakness on f2. This f2 pawn is still incredibly weak. And yeah, we just have a fantastic position with a huge initiative. The bishop pair. We don't have this weird sort of awkward trimmed in bishop that's usually kind of stuck behind some pawns. This is a fantastic trap and something that you guys need to be aware of. Instead, I didn't see all that. And next time I will. I look forward. I'm just waiting to get to try this idea now. I played c takes d. And white's idea with trying to do this when they have the queen on c2 is they want to play knight to b5. And normally, this is a strong idea. It kicks this bishop. They're going to get into c2, and they're getting traditional Stonewall counterplay, where we just have this sort of weak c-file, which is pretty typical in the Stonewall. But here, because white hasn't castled yet, we have bishop b4 check, which is a nice idea. Now, white could just drop the knight back, but then why did you play knight b5? So bishop to c3, and now bishop back to e2. This bishop is critical. A lot of those move order subtleties that I was talking about in the opening, a lot of them are based around making sure that we don't trade this bishop off. So by giving this check, we block the c-file, and then we drop the bishop back, and this way we keep a knight or any other piece out of the c7 square, and we get to keep our bishop. And the bishop is often on e7 in the Stonewall anyway. I prefer it to be on d6, but e7 is better than nothing. So as the game continued, he dropped the bishop back, and now I went knight to f6, which makes this threat of knight to c7 or anything like that not nearly as worrisome. I mean, if knight c7 immediately, well, I just drop the rook out of the way, and it's not really clear what you've done. I'm going to put the bishop back on b6, d6, and it doesn't make sense what you've done. So here, white just chose to castle, and I played bishop to d7, which now this knight probably needs to go back. We would love to trade this bishop off. If we get an opportunity, we're definitely going to do that. And here my opponent played rook to c1, and I just took the bishop. And this is already a huge positional victory for us because we've gotten rid of our light squared bishop, which unless we're able to play e5 is often a pretty cruddy piece. But now we get another really sort of nice sort of bishop maneuver. So before we gave a check and then we dropped back. Well, now I'd like to put the bishop back on d6, but I'd like to do it with tempo. And so I play bishop to a3, and now this rook's got to leave the c-file, and we go back to d6. And now, with no loss of time, I managed to put my bishop on e7 and then back on d6, and white doesn't have anything to show for those tempi. Now, white played queen to b2, which I guess makes sense. The point is he doesn't want this bishop coming back because he knows that if he puts the rook there, I always have this opportunity to come back. And also, he's lending support to this e5 square. White would often really like to put a knight there, and in this game, I really tried hard to make sure that that was never possible. One might argue I tried a bit too hard, and we'll look at that. So knight to e4, which is a natural square for the knight. That's one of the reasons we're not so worried about putting this knight on h6 because it loses its ability to go to e4, because often we're playing knight to d7, knight to f6, and it'll be this knight that makes its way to e4. So bishop to d3, natural looking move. And here I played queen to f6. Now technically, g5 is immediately possible, and we let this knight come in, and there's an interesting pawn sack with g4, where we do get some initiative, and the computer likes that best, but ever so teensy-weensy, slightly bit worse is this queen f6. And my point is that I want to play g5, but I want to do it in a time where knight e5 is not a possible response. Here, it was possible because we could drop a pawn because bishop takes, pawn takes, and then knight here. But now with the queen on the square, that's not really a possibility because white's the one that's going to lose a pawn. So now the bishop comes, and I played knight takes c3. Again, really fixated on this idea of playing g4 and not allowing the knight to come in. This is probably a sketchy decision, and I should probably just play g5 anyway and allow this to happen, where we capture with the f-pawn, the knight jumps in, and we have this g4 sacrifice. This is similar to what we were looking at, what we would have done a move earlier except we're a tempo down, and it's still good. You can see the engine likes this quite a lot. The point being that after captures, we have the queen coming to g6, the knight's going to come to g5, and we're going to have a pretty good attack here on the h2 square. And h3 is not really going to be possible because of this pen with the queen here, if you guys can visualize that. But instead, I played knight to take c3, which we still have a pretty healthy advantage here. And white took the knight, of course, and now g5, because this is not possible, because it simply loses a pawn. We have tremendous control over this e5 square. Now g3 happened, and this is the sort of the first moment where I really went awry. G4 is the strongest move, and I definitely considered G4 as an option here, but I didn't like it because I thought the knight's going to go to H5, and then I didn't really see a clear path forward for how to attack, and that's one of the main things I want to show you guys because this is super cool. With the knight being on H5, it looks like our position's pretty cramped up, and it's not clear how we're going to make a progress. I mean, it doesn't really seem like E5 is possible, F4 doesn't seem possible, H5, H4 doesn't seem possible. But indeed, these are all things that are possible. Knight to g5, and we're just threatening to come into here. And white doesn't want to allow us to capture back on h4, and they also don't want us to end up with a pawn on h3 because we can already have this nice pincher mate. So bishop to e2 is a pretty natural thing to do, just trying to make sure that we don't drop a knight into f3. King g2 is also a possible idea. Usually this idea is associated with trying to bring the rook over and putting h4, or just putting the rook over and defending that square against our counterattack on the h file, which again doesn't really look like it's a thing, but it is. But here, king to g2 is actually not that great, and we'll look at why in a moment. And it's mostly because it retreats the knight's, it blocks the knight's retreat to g2. Often this knight g2 wants to come back out to f4, and that's not possible with king g2. Analyze this a bit further, you can check the PGN. So bishop to e2, and now we play knight to e4, and queen to b2, just trying to get off of this file and defend the c file, trying to make sure that we don't lose. Make sure that we don't lose the queen. Probably best is to come back to e1, but that's probably not something that white really wants to do. They would prefer to be active on the queen side. So queen to h6, which looks like it does nothing. Because, like, what are we actually threatening here? We're never going to take this. But we're already moving to try to support this f4. And notice by putting the queen on h6, we're making this f4 square a bit weaker because we're giving double duty to the pawn on g3. This pawn needs to cover the knight, of course, which means it's not covering the f4 square. So something like rook c1, just trying to play like normal, natural, active moves, this fails miserably because we have rook f6. Again, this looks strange. Usually when we see rook f6 in this kind of position, it's because we want to have a queen move forward, and we're going to back up with the rook and put it behind, which is actually a key point of why we went to h6. Because, for example, if, say, rook c2, just trying to double, and we bring our other rook over to f-file, again, really preparing this e4 push. If white tries to, like, drop back, well, this is terrible. Absolutely game over. Because we'll just drop into h3, and then our next plan is we're going to play rook h3, and then this looks an awful lot like a checkmate situation to me. I mean, this is atrocious. So, for example, something like bishop to d3, just trying to take off this knight. We go h3, and after takes, well, we can just take here. And you can't even take it because of this. This is just checkmate. So the knight can never really drop back. Once the queen's here and we've got the rook on f6, this is not an option. But say the knight stays here, and he just routinely tries to double. This is like by far not the best way for white to play. I'm just demonstrating some of the key ideas. We can now play f4, and it really has a lot to do with because this knight is requiring the attention of the g-pawn here. And this is like a game over kind of situation. The tactics here follow crazy. I mean, so e4, we can just take it. We can absolutely just grab it. And it's fine. Take the pawn. I don't mind. And now we have knight takes e2. And if you try to take this, well, one, we just pick up this guy. So you don't really want to do that. You can't take here because this is just atrocious. Your bishop's hanging. The g file is open. This would be crazy. So say you try to just come back and make, oops, not here. You can't take the pawn. Just try to come here. We can actually now just play bishop to e3. And it looks like you should be able to take it, but this is not an option. This is just a mate in 3, because in addition to attacking the f4 square with the queen, notice we're also hitting the e3, which really, this f4 move is an attack on the e3 pawn. And so after we captured and we took here, and say you played the rook here, this e3 move, this is such a nice move. You take it. This is just a mate in 3. We give a check, and the king's got to go to g2. There's no other move. I mean, you can try to hide here, but this is not looking too good. This is just a mate on the next move, and this position just falls apart when we achieve f4. So this is a key idea that you want to think about when you're trying to attack in this Stonewall structure. If you can get f4 through, you're going to smash through position. It's fantastic. So instead, I didn't do this. I played king to h8, sort of reverting to traditional ideas. I thought, there's not really anything going on the queen side, which is totally true. And we have king to d2, sort of preparing this idea. He sees that I maybe want to try to launch this pawn up the board, or put the rook here and try to launch f4 up the board this way, and have a pin along this line. But rook g8 and rook h1, and now I played rook a f8, which we still have a pretty solid position. I had opportunities to play g4 and didn't go for it, and I've played kind of slowly now, and I've actually let white set up a defense. You can see how awkwardly passive white's sort of forced to play when we just make sort of natural looking attacking ideas. And as the game went, h4 was played, and I captured it. This looks pretty natural, but this is really quite terrible. And going back, g4 was a much stronger way to play. At this point, we're going to stop looking at the right way to attack, and you guys are going to learn how I screwed this up. I really like showing you the games where I really went awry and how I'm learning from this, because one, I hope it makes you guys feel better when you're doing this, when you're learning a new opening and you're getting crushed and doing all kinds of stupid stuff. And then I'm hoping to prevent you guys from having to do that yourself. You get to watch me do dumb things, and then you don't have to. So after the capture, plays with the rook, and now I brought the knight in, and he takes it, we take back, and now it brings here, and there's tremendous pressure on h7 now. In fact, it's definitely the white is the one who has the initiative now. So this is something that you really want to look out for, is if white gets this opportunity to open the h-file, we definitely didn't need to do that. I mean, much stronger going back is, again, just to play g4. G4 is a really key idea, especially when this e5 square is not available. And now, h5 is not even available. You have to make a really sort of obnoxious looking move. And I mean, the knight doesn't want to come back to e2. E2 doesn't look that great either, honestly, because this gives us e5. Told you we have these e5 ideas a lot. I mean, these are our main breaks. We have e5, f4, and then sometimes we get to play h5, h4. All of these are sort of key central ideas, especially in a situation where we're the only ones with a dark square bishop. So instead, I went this way, and we'll go through the rest of the game kind of quickly. Captures, and tremendous pressure, and this g4 move from white. This is a move that really shocked me, but it's really strong. It's a super strong idea. The point is, it just wants to open the bishop up. This is a pretty normal idea in the Stonewall, but it looks absolutely crazy here, because I have 2 rooks and a queen and a bishop all pointing at the king, and then he goes to open a line in front of his own king. I can't even take it. This just one, I immediately get mated, but this just looks shockingly obnoxious. So queen to e7, I played as drop back, and he played f3, and I just went full scale, cover up and defend the h7 square, and I actually should probably be able to hold this. The game went on for quite a bit longer. We just both of us just shuffled things around, trying to blah blah blah. Neither one of us were really in terrible time pressure either. And finally, here, I made sort of the key mistake when I allowed this g6 move. Instead of my last time when I dropped the bishop back to the d6 square, I should have dropped it back all the way to f8. And then I can move this rook out of the way. I kick this rook out. And as long as I make sure that this g6 never happens, I'm probably going to hold this. The computer definitely likes white. As long as you never allow g6, there's really no way for white to make progress. And this should have ended in a draw. But after I allowed this sort of after I allowed the g6 and the breakthrough, the game's actually over pretty quickly now. I'm in a lot of trouble. It's still technically kind of holdable, but by the time I came up with the idea to play bishop to f8, it was too much too late. And this is sort of an atrocious situation for me. It's way hard to defend this now. And after just a few captures, there's really nothing I can do. Things just start falling all over the place. Anyhow, thanks a lot, guys, and I wish you the best. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.